You're listening to the Prepper Recon podcast. For questions, comments, and podcast archives, go to prepperrecon.com. Ready Made Resources is a trusted name in the prepper community because they've been around for 18 years. They offer great prices on night vision, water filtration, long-term storage food, solar energy components, and provide free technical service. Get ready for an uncertain future at ReadyMadeResources.com. Trading Post in the Woods is ran by veteran crisis responders who know how important it is to be prepared. They specialize in comprehensive natural survival remedy kits, preparedness and homesteading supplies, as well as skills training. Visit them online today at tradingpostinthewoods.com. Today's guest is New Hampshire State Representative Dan Itse. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, Mark. It's an honor and a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself. When did you get into politics, and maybe more importantly, why?
Well, I got into politics, I guess you'd say it was. I would not use the word fate. I was directed by God. We moved to New Hampshire 25 years ago. We were selling a house down in Massachusetts, very southern. We could hardly have gotten farther from New Hampshire. And as we were selling the house, we had just closed on it, I think. And I said to my wife, I have no idea where we're going to move, but wherever it is, I'm going to be involved in politics, and I don't even know what that means. We moved up here. I was startled to find out how much of the Massachusetts ethos had gotten here before me. And one of my pet peeves always has been and still is Child Protective Services. And I went to an anti-DCYF rally, and we had rented, that's a long story in itself, a story of immense blessing, but we were renting a house here in Fremont. And I'd been told it belonged to the previous state representative from Fremont. And I knew nothing of New Hampshire politics at that time. Well, I went to an anti-DCYF rally and met then Representative David Wheeler. He's since been a senator and is now an executive counselor. And it was we had a director of DCYF, that's our Department of Children, Youth, and Families, that had as her objective having somebody watching every family in the state. And I went to this rally against the legislation, and I got to talking with Dave, and I said, well, you know, I'm from Fremont, and I'm living in the house previously owned by Representative Bill McCain. What do you mean? I said, well, you know, he lost the house to the bank, and, well, this legislation that we were protesting was sponsored by Representative Bill McCain. And as soon as Dave found out that Bill McCain was no longer in Fremont, he was disqualified from being in the legislature. The legislation itself had become so radioactive, he had to resign, nobody would pick it up, and the legislation died. And that was my introduction to politics. Dave invited me to his house, talked to me about the Christian Coalition, if you remember that. And looking at it, he lived over in Merrimack County, I lived in Rockingham County, and it became apparent to me that the obvious answer was that I had to start a chapter in Rockingham County. And so I became the chairman of the Rockingham County Christian Coalition. That was 1992. We moved here in December of 91. We substantially affected the elections in Rockingham County for the good. And it was one of those things where I was just going by the Holy Spirit, and I did not map out a course. I simply took the next step, each step. And when all was said and done, we had raised and spent a little over $1,000, which, if you remember back in '92, that was real money, and changed the face of Rockingham County politics. And then shortly thereafter, in '94, my youngest son was born. He was brain injured at birth. That ended up taking me out of politics for a while. Just the overwhelming impact on our family, which is ongoing. But by '98, I had recovered sufficiently that I ran for state rep, lost the primary eventually by 4 votes, after a recount, and then the next 2000 I was ran unopposed, and I have been the representative from Fremont ever since. So I'm now going on my 9th term, so the 17th and 18th years. I spent my first 6 years solely battling issues of DCYF, and got my first successful legislation passed in 2006. Really learned how to play politics, and got due process reintroduced into Child Protective Services. And so at the end of that, I said, well, Lord, I've accomplished, why I came up here. If you want me to stay up here, you have to give me a reason to be up here. And that summer, we had a controversy between the legislature and the court over how names would appear on the ballot. And I made all kinds. I found a particular article in our Constitution and made all kinds of arguments as to why what the judiciary had done was unconstitutional. They had told the Secretary of State not to execute the law as we had passed it, but to do something else. And my arguments were adequate, that the legislature called itself back into session, both chambers, and passed an order telling the Secretary of State to do it our way, which is what he wanted. Unfortunately, the Senate passed it first, came to the House. The House, I was unable to attend. I had to be away on other business that day because we all work. I do this for $100 a year. And they amended the order with words from my emails. And unfortunately, the Senate had adjourned themselves and were unable to concur with our amendment, and the legislation died stillbirth because they couldn't concur. But as a result, one of my mentors said, you've made all these great arguments. You need to do a commentary on the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire. And I said, gee, really? You really think I should do this? And he said, absolutely. And so I proceeded to do so. That was September. I finished Part 1, our Bill of Rights, by Thanksgiving, and I finished the form of government by Christmas. And that's something that I exchange when I'm giving lectures. Great homeschool resource, great legislative resource. Over the ensuing 10 years, I've edited after every session or term, depending, to expound on various constitutional controversies that have occurred during the past session or term. And it's grown from 80 some odd pages to 120 some odd pages. But it's made me the constitutional wonk in the legislature, and enough of my compatriots have gone from the House of Representatives to the Senate that I hold considerable sway in both bodies.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. The dollar's lost over 90% of its purchasing power since 1971. Silver, on the other hand, has proven to be a very stable form of wealth preservation over the years. And where do you buy silver? Silver.com, of course. Silver.com offers fantastic prices on gold and silver. Check out Silver.com today. Whether your plan is to bug out or bug in, CampingSurvival.com has all of your preparedness needs, including fish antibiotics, long-term storage food, and water filters. Use coupon code PREPARECON for 5% off your order at CampingSurvival.com. So you mentioned that you're working for $100 a year. So I suppose you're still doing your engineering gig. We've had Washington State Representatives David Taylor and Representative Matt Shea. David Taylor's a rancher and Matt Shea's a lawyer. So it seems like state government is a little bit less of a career path than federal government. Do you think our founders envisioned folks like Harry Reid, who would appoint the BLM director to kick ranchers off public land so he could grow the family business and plant bigger solar farms. And then when I hear myself say that, it sounds like something from Venezuela or Cuba, but I guess it's a similar political doctrine, isn't it?
Well, it varies state to state. I mean, I know Representative Shea. I've been in contact with Representative Shea, but New Hampshire is unique. We have the third largest legislature in the English-speaking world, after the Parliament and the United States House of Representatives. We actually have a level of representation that is commensurate with what it was at the founding. We have a rep for every 3,500 people, approximately. But if you go to Pennsylvania, they make over $100,000 a year. You go to Massachusetts, they make in the high tens of thousands, and they get paid more for each committee they serve on and such. What we actually get is $200 a term. The Speaker gets and the President of the Senate get $250 a term, and then we get mileage. That's our compensation. So the good thing is that everybody's there because of a love for New Hampshire. And I know there are some people there with extreme minority with nefarious purposes, but you can presume that everybody is there. Everybody there wants the same end result. We just have radically different views on how to get there. It makes it as disparate as the two-party ethos are. It's still a very collegial environment.
New Hampshire's motto is "Live free or die." Your state's surrounded by other states that can't seem to get enough tyranny. How has your state been able to maintain that thirst for freedom?
Well, it's part of, I guess, living in the rocks. But we're not as free as one might think. We have more licensed professions than any other state, and that's something I am fundamentally opposed to. I mean, if our founding fathers could look at us now and say you had to ask permission from the government to practice your profession, they'd be rolling over in their graves. Their ethos was a man who doesn't provide for his family is worse than an unbeliever. And we're saying if you don't say "Mother May I" to the government, you can't work at all.
And then the other side would say that if a nail technician doesn't have a license, they could potentially put the wrong color on somebody's nails and damage them for life.
Excuse me. Swallowed wrong. That's called market control. Somebody does a bad job, they get a bad reputation, and they don't get business. I'm an engineer, and actually, I have two businesses. One, excuse me, my first business is Christopherson Engineering. I do combustion and air pollution control and power plants and boilers. And that's a proprietorship. I have not incorporated. I have to do a good job, or I could lose my house. The other one is called White Cliff Technologies, and it's a form to commercialize some technology I developed about 10 years ago now. It's for combustion and boilers, large boilers. So if any of your listeners have wood-fired boilers, industrial scale wood-fired boilers, give me a call. I need the business. But we all the states have their little aspect of tyranny. Half of our budget is Health and Human Services, and now, granted, we have a relatively low compared to most other states. There's a group of us down in the lower tier, Alaska, and there's I think some of the northern plain states are down around our level. But It's basically done by having a lot of volunteerism. New Hampshire gets a bad rep sometimes. Supposedly we don't give so much to organized charities. Well, in fact, New Hampshire has a high giving rate, but a lot of times it's just never recorded because people aren't concerned about getting the tax break.
And one of the reasons we wanted to get you on this show was to talk about post-collapse government. With the growing chasm between the left and the right and the $20 trillion debt, it's not impossible to imagine a day where our current system simply fails. And we know that nature abhors a vacuum. In a post-collapse world, how long do you think anarchy would reign before warlords and dictators stepped in to fill that void?
That depends upon the people. I mean, you have to understand that the real ethos of American government is control of the government by the people. And would they stand up as their forefathers did and create governments in the vacuum, or would they submit themselves, allow themselves to be submitted to warlords? I agree with you. In the horizon sense, I don't see a way of avoiding collapse. We are, beyond the $20 trillion. There's the unfunded liabilities, which are over $100 trillion. I don't see it as indefinitely sustainable. Excuse me. However, I think we've been given a reprieve. The American people are the most industrious, resilient people on the face of the earth. And I think the miracle is that it hasn't collapsed already. I mean, that quite frankly. But if you look at look at the founding of this, I want to say country, but of American government, people don't realize why American self-government developed. Do you know what was happening in England when the Pilgrims and their cohorts were settling North America in the 1620s and 30s?
Yeah, they were being told when to go to church, where to go to church, how to pray, and everything else. And if you didn't do it the state's way, you went to jail.
Think about what was happening in England at that time. Ever hear of a fellow by the name of Cromwell?
Yeah.
That's 1620s, 1630s, 1640s was the English Civil War. And Cromwell rising to power in the late 1630s. American government arose because in essence, the government that was controlling us here collapsed. They were concerned with continuity of what government was going to take over next in England. They weren't concerned about us, and we were left to either govern ourselves or founder. And so by the time 1650 rolls around and Cromwell puts Charles back on the throne, and then you have the glorious revolution of 1689 with William and Mary, and up with a stable monarchy again because they've agreed to the English Bill of Rights, the people in America had gotten used to self-government because England was exercising no heavy hand over here. They couldn't. That's not too awfully different if Washington, D.C. collapses. The question is, how are we going to respond? And you have to, 2 years ago, pretty much exactly 2 years ago, I started reading John Locke, Second Treatise on Government, and understanding the fundamental underpinnings of what our founders were thinking. Locke wrote in 1650. So this is his writings are contemporaneous with all the stuff with Cromwell and what's going through Locke's head, and he develops the whole idea of self-government. And I don't say he had the idea, but he articulates and develops it into a traceable and referenceable thought pattern. And the whole idea of, the English putting William and Mary onto the throne was an issue of self-government. And so if we look at the post-apocalyptic, what government are the people of America, and it's going to end up being very local. I look at New Hampshire. If everything were to collapse right now, by car, the current government is an hour away. There aren't enough horses to get to Concord to do business if everything thoroughly unraveled. So you'd have to be looking at establishing government much more locally. Are you going to rise up and develop a form of government that is representative of the people? And unfortunately, our contemporaries don't even understand terms of art and I read William Forsyth's books, one second after and 1 year after. And they refer to the government that erupts there, I guess you'd say, as martial law. People don't even know what the term martial law is. When we had the marathon bombing in Boston, and you had the local police going out in riot gear and searching house to house, and people were told to stay indoors so the police could do their search. That was called martial law. That's not martial law. That does not fit the definition of martial law. That's civilian law. There were no here, but martial law is when the military is the law enforcement agency. In William Forsyth's book, there was no military, so it couldn't have been martial law. It was dictatorial civilian law. And are you going to do that? And these people in the book just assume power. Now, initially it's the mayor who is an elected official, but then there's no elections, and people just assume positions of authority. Are you going to allow that? Or are you going to require elections? In America, we used to do our elections at town meeting. No reason we couldn't do that again if circumstances were required.
Yeah.
But you
talk to us a little bit more.
You have to
talk to us a little bit more about this process of coming together in smaller groups to form a government to fill this void. Maybe in more rural places, it's going to be maybe a couple of square miles, and maybe it's going to be a neighborhood that's going to have to actually come up with some type of government in small towns or even larger cities.
Well, and the first thing you want to do is you want to build on any form of law or pattern of law that you have existing. What do you have for a legal structure that you could build off of? Say we're here in Fremont. Well, who's the highest available constitutional officer? That'd be me. So at least doesn't mean I'm going to be the president of Fremont, but it means I would help guide my neighbors to establishing something that works for them. In New England, and this is not true necessarily of where you are, in New England, the local legislature is the townspeople. That's what we have town meeting. That's one of my favorite little, I don't know, smirks, I guess you'd say, is people complain about the high school tax. Well, guess what, guys? You voted that. If you want to blame somebody for the high school taxes, look in the mirror, because you passed that budget. Everybody in town has the opportunity to vote on that budget. We have 3 selectmen who are the executive branch. We don't have a judicial branch, but we have at least one justice of the peace in town who holds a state commission. So you build upon that. You find everybody in town who is a justice of the peace, and you look to them to be your local judiciary, so that you don't have commingling or too much commingling of the 3 branches of government. You look for ways to deal with, for instance, an extreme deficit I see here in my town is none of our police officers live in town. If things unravel, they're not coming to work. However, I do know that within the existing state laws, the town has the power to define and appoint watchmen. So you could effectively create, and we don't have a state guard, a state militia, so you could effectively create a town militia, because you can define whatever the watchmen to be, whatever you need them to be. Armed, unarmed, guarding the egresses to the town. They not necessarily law enforcement per se, because law enforcement is more investigative, but some sort of alarm and protection system. You have to learn how your state is organized, because every state is organized differently. Go through and read your state constitution and figure out how it is your state is, how your founders wanted your state to operate. Go back and look at the history. What were the laws like when your state was first founded? There's been a lot of corruption. We've had a tremendous amount of judicial usurpation over the past 200 years. One of the things I do when I'm studying our Constitution, I want to find out what our founders meant by a particular article of the Constitution. Look at what laws they executed pursuant to that, and you'll learn what they meant.
That's the end of the first half of my interview with Representative Dan Itse. Tune in next week for the rest of the show.
In A Haunt for Jackals by best-selling author Mark Goodwin, Danny Walker's survival retreat has been devastated by violence since the detonation of the EMP. Regent Slusher's designs on absolute power have already brought him to Danny's doorstep once, leaving a trail of blood and heartbreak in his wake. Another conflict with the malicious dictator will spell certain death for the remaining members of the compound. Danny's only hope is to infiltrate Schlusher's camp and bring him down from the inside. It's a risky proposition. If he is caught, he'll be executed as a spy, but there is no other alternative. In this epic struggle between good and evil, Danny's mettle will be tested, his faith will be tried, and he'll have to dig deep for the courage to continue. Buy your copy of A Haunt for Jackals, Book 3 of 7 Cows, Ugly and Gaunt, in paperback, Kindle, or audio edition from Amazon.com today.